we advise many players, especially those who are, just starting out studying poker seriously. One of the best adjustments you can make to your game early on to plug a leak is just stop limping. I know that I did that a long, long time ago, and it completely transformed my game. But over time, you see opportunities to limp, and is having fish at your table one of those opportunities?
So there are lots of opportunities to limp, and the major reason why you see advice like stop limping or especially stop open limping is because for most players it's just a massive, massive leak. They do it with far too many hands. It's super cheap, so it doesn't really feel like a big issue even when it kind of is, and it's just an easy band-aid you can throw in your strategy immediately and start getting out of some bad spots and start putting yourself into better spots more often than not. So that's kind of where it comes from. But the thing you have to be very, very aware of is that there are plenty of good spots to limp as long as you know what you're doing with that limp, what that limp is accomplishing. Now, again, when there are fish on your right and they've already acted before you, and if you're limping, then they've already limped in front of you, open limped or limped behind, then these can be situations where you might say, okay, what are my options with my hand? I could raise, I could fold, I could limp behind. And the first thing I always ask myself is, could I raise? Because if I can raise profitably, then I know I'm never folding. And the question is just, do I raise or do I limp back? And if I can't raise, then I know it's just between limping behind and folding. So it kind of simplifies 3 options down to 2. And when I'm asking myself, can I raise, I also have to ask myself, if I call, what does that really accomplish? Because if I call, say, limp behind from middle position, there are still a lot of players left to act, especially players that could take position on us. And then I have to ask, am I inviting an isolation raise? Now, good players probably aren't going to hammer with that isolation raise too often, simply because it gets very expensive, it gets very difficult against multiple limpers to get them to fold. Once that fish calls, you're probably coming along as well, which means they're probably getting involved in a multi-way pot a ton of the time. Again, they don't get that creative with their sizing, so they're probably going to go too small and doesn't really accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. It's a little too deep, but you kind of get the idea.
Yeah.
So the regs aren't overly incentivized to go bonkers here. Bad players or not so much thinking players, that could go either way, but on average, those players are a little too passive anyway, so you're probably not getting ISO'd very often. But you want to be careful about just always limping behind here. A lot of players will make the mistake of limping back with ace-queen offsuit or ace-jack suited or king-queen offsuit. Hands that just raise better, especially if there's any chance of isolating that fishy opponent when you have position. So that's kind of the way that I think about it. There are lots of hands to limp back with, though, like suited aces that could, hammer really, really big pots where you have nut flushes and they get stuck with second, third, or fourth, or fifth, sixth, seventh flushes, that kind of thing. But again, when it's the stronger kind of ace-x, like ace-jack suited, probably raising that every single time. But something like ace-deuce, ace-3, ace-6 suited could make a much better limp behind. And then your other candidates are the obvious ones, suited connectors, set mining kind of hands, Broadway hands that are playable with position against the fish, but not necessarily something that I am super happy about raising. But there's not going to be too many of those. And then maybe some suited gappers and stuff as we start getting closer and closer to the button. Just be very careful here, because a lot of players will make the mistake of just, there's a fish that limped in front of me, so I'm going to limp behind with king deuce suited and queen eight suited and everything that's even slightly suited, slightly connected.